All right, gentlemen, 30 seconds. Hey, there you are, Science Bob. Good to have you here in the chat room. All right, everyone, here we go. 10 seconds. Make sure you give us a thumbs up. We're going to have a great time tonight. I hope you all enjoy tonight's show. Hi, Lori. Good to have you here. From the mountains of central British Columbia to you listening around the world, this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott, sitting in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. We welcome you to tonight's show on our terrestrial affiliates across North America and digitally on TalkStream Live and Revolution Radio. If you want to take a listen to our archives, we have them free for you at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. Tonight's show is brought to you by Chive Charities. Help make the world 10% happier by visiting Chive Charities today. You can find them on our website. Bob McGwier is back for another edition of Science Bob and Friends. Science Bob is a former member of the Science and Mathematics faculty of Virginia Tech University who's now involved in the UFO field with teams like SkyHub and learning about experiencers and what they go through. Tonight, we are joined by special guest John Alexander. This man is considered by many an American hero. Colonel Alexander has dabbled in everything from his heroics as a soldier to studying and researching UFOs and Skinwalker Ranch. So you know tonight is going to be a lot of fun with Science Bob and Mr. John Alexander. Then at the bottom of hour number 3, I will bring you the SOR Newswire, brought to you by Paranoia Magazine. Science Bob, always a pleasure to have you here, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Dave, and I'm looking forward to tonight.
I'm looking forward to tonight, too, because, you know, you and I, when we started setting out about talking about who do we want to bring on, and one of the first names that you thought of was John Alexander. Why is that?
Well, John's done quite a few interviews, and he's written some very interesting books. And I got to tell you, most of the interviews I've seen John do have been awfully thin.
Thin how?
They just don't go past skin deep. He's done a lot of interesting stuff and could tell us a lot of interesting things, and we'll have to figure out how much of these interesting things he is able and willing to tell us.
Well, let's find out right off the bat. Mr. John Alexander, outside of the waistline, are you a thin interview?
Am I a what?
Well, apparently Bob's saying you're a thin interview. So we're just asking, you know, you have so much knowledge built up inside of you over your years in studying, in authoring books. You know, how do you store it all?
You have this big biocomputer. Just store stuff there, yeah. Or, as one might think, there's an external computer out there, and we just access it and draw in the information we need.
There you go. He's extending the consciousness field.
Exactly. Mr. Alexander,
right.
You had an incredible career in the United States Army. And for many, and when your name comes up, the word hero is pretty much synonymous with whom you are. And thank you so much for the service to the United States, for everything that you have done for your country. When you decided to leave the military and get more into the private sector, did you ever think that you were going to go down the road of paranormal, supernatural, UFOs?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had been involved in that long before I ever entered the military.
Well, that's interesting. John, look, most of your easily accessed biographies don't tell us a whole lot about the young John Alexander in New York before you joined the Army. As a high school graduate, it looks to me like around 18 or 19. If you would, please, tell us a little bit about your upbringing and the decision to join the Army, which completely laid out your life path.
Well, first of all, I left New York when I was 6 months old.
Okay.
Moved across the river to Jersey and left there before I was 2, and basically grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, mighty Mississippi River and whatnot. And after I graduated from high school, had a scholarship to college. I went to college for a year. I just wasn't terribly enamored and said, I think I want to go jump out of airplanes. So signed up to do that. I should say I had my really first job before that, and I was working in a brewery, G. Heileman Brewery, if anybody knows Heilemans.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, nothing like a little Wisconsin beer, Wisconsin cheese, and Wisconsin beer cheese. Okay, yep. So John, when I was young, I was heavily involved in integrated public schools in Alabama, and of course that was opposed by the Ku Klux Klan and others. And I feared for my life, since a prominent elected official in my hometown was the Grand Wizard of the KKK. My mother and her friends recruited a candidate to run against him and defeated him. And just as an aside, the lynching stopped as soon as he was out of office. So I got to tell you, I feared the impact because I went to school with the KKK politicians' children. They threatened me with weapons in school. But I had read this book by Frank Herbert called Dune. And I learned about Thich Nhat Hanh from the Paris Peace Accords and read his mindfulness training manual, hoping that it would be like a litany against fear from Dune. So it worked for me, and throughout my career, which is later and less super duper as yours, but in the intelligence community. So I have a feeling that as a young man, you were heavily impacted, one presumes, in Vietnam, and certainly saw a lot and heard a lot in your command position with Army Special Forces team. First of all, what was your rank, and can you tell us of any engaging experiences you had in Vietnam with a paranormal phenomenon, near-death experience, Buddhism, and mindful meditation, or anything like that happened to you while you were in Vietnam?
Well, didn't think we were going there. Now, when I got to Vietnam, though, I had been next door for a year before that, i.e. in Thailand. I had a Special Forces team in Thailand first, and then came on over to Vietnam. The one story, I guess, that I tell you about, well, first of all, my camp was unique. Special Forces camps were isolated. We were up on the Cambodian border, and actually had a Buddhist temple inside the camp area, which was pretty unique. My chief interpreter, Mike, had spent 6 years as a monk, so there were things that we discussed. The closest thing that I mentioned, well, there's a couple of them. One was getting shot at, and as I say, the difference between hearing bullets whiz and bullets crack. You may know from a physics standpoint just how close a crack is like that. Fortunately, there was a little ditch there, and I turned and dove and ended up there because the second bullet was right on target. but fortunately, I was already in the ditch when that happened. But the other story I tell about is that it was a lot of mines, booby traps. And turns out we were out on patrol and had wandered into a minefield, not knowing it. There's some stuff going on. I started to back up and all of a sudden stopped. And across the back of my boot was the tripwire that was already starting to pull loose. And if I'd gone, another inch, I probably would be either on crutches or having prosthetic legs or something like that, because it was, closer than you'd like to have. And like you say, why did you stop? Don't know. It was just one of those things. You stop now.
Wow, yeah, that's so. Yeah, I did a little work right after 9/11 that had me doing some interesting things. I was also in Saudi Arabia after the Iraqis invaded Kuwait. Those were interesting, to say the least. And I have heard the sonic boom crack more than once. So I did get what you're talking about. Yeah, I was just wondering if did you interact at all with any of the Buddhists you might have gotten to know around meditation and mindfulness practice?
Yeah, frankly, no. Like I said, Mike had been a monk for a long time. Many of the people, in the Southeast Asia Buddhist tradition, all males become monks for some period. Most of them 6 months or so. It's very interesting because I've been back now and you can actually do it online. It strikes me as a little strange. But no, we were kind of tied up doing other things. We didn't spend much time thinking about contemplating things or meditation.
Okay, Dave?
Colonel Alexander, right a few minutes ago, you mentioned that you had interest in UFOs and the paranormal way before you started studying them. Do you recall your first paranormal experience and what led you down the path of wanting to learn about this?
Well, actually, it's probably not quite what you think. It was an experience. I do remember 1947. I was going to a very unique grade school, which happened to be part of a college which became the University of Wisconsin at La Crosse. And so we had access to a lot of resources that the public schools didn't. And one of the things we had was an internal radio system, and every day a student would be allowed to go in and do a broadcast on any topic that you wanted to. And I remember, fifth grade, maybe 10 years old at the time, at the 1947, we're talking about the very, flying saucers are just being talked about. But that was the topic that I chose to do the radio broadcast on, back then.
So do you recall your first UFO that you've seen?
Well, I've only had a couple of minor sightings, actually. One, I assume, because it was with Chris Bledsoe, we'll probably get more into. The other was, I was up in Washington, state of Washington. James Gilliland had a place there. And I was up staying with them for a few days. And I was out at night with third-gen night vision goggles and watching stuff come over. And I saw this thing sort of tracking along. It was high altitude, though. And then thought, well, it looks like it's a satellite, but I'm kind of in an unusual orbit. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And I said, oh, satellites don't stop. So it lasted for a while, but I mean, this was a night light high in the sky and no distinct form to it at all.
Goodness. When you were in the military, and Bob, this is my final question.
Sure.
When you were in the military, sir, and you were, doing your thing, through Vietnam and then your service afterwards, were you ever briefed or ever forewarned about seeing UFOs on the battlefield or anything like that?
100% no. Now, in case you haven't read, I wrote, the book, UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities. And one of the things I did, I was still a lieutenant colonel at the time, but put a group together to study UFOs. And I had folks from all the services, from the intelligence community and from aerospace. We all had top secret SCI level tickets. And frankly, the basic assumption was that there was a big black program someplace, and maybe they wanted it out, and we could help with that. And of course, what I found out was something totally different. For the most part, and I'm no Lou Alessandro, and he had done something simpler, but 35 years later was more successful. But no, what we found is everybody knew, the rumors and whatnot, and everybody thought somebody else was minding the store, but nobody seemed to be.
So have you? You of course have worked and known Eric Davis, and there's been a fair amount of interaction recently, especially around Eric Davis claiming certain things about materials and so forth, and crash.
We're talking decades later. Yeah, I understand. We're talking decades later.
Yep. Oh yeah, I get it.
I knew Eric. I mean, I was there when we hired him for NIDS.
Yes.
And worked with Eric for several years before Bob broke NIDS up.
Yes. Yes, and so I understood that you just happened to have a phone call from Bob Bigelow wanting to be involved with your early work and in fact supporting it. I'm certain that was a big help because doing a lot of that kind of research with travel is not cheap. There are expense involved. But Eric seems to be claiming that recently, especially through Edgar Mitchell and his interactions with John Podesta and all that stuff coming out on WikiLeaks, that there is some kind of program now.
Oh, wait, you've got so many things mixed up there, and they're definitely mixed. Because Edgar wasn't dealing with Podesta, and Edgar died. The stuff with Podesta is totally different. Had apparently a personal interest, and that leads into stuff that Lou was doing. Eric was involved with some of that. That was much later, and under when Hal was working with Lou, Hal Putoff, of course. Yeah, you got a whole bunch of stuff mixed together there. The pieces don't go together.
Let me bring up what I'm talking about. In the last 2.5 or 3 weeks, we have seen WikiLeaks materials where Edgar Mitchell was interacting with John Podesta through a third party, but it was definitely Mitchell and Podesta interacting. And I just wondered
what time frame?
It was during the time when the GRU was mining John Podesta's emails. So it was before Edgar died, but it was during the period when he was involved with Hillary Clinton, and WikiLeaks outed all of this stuff, and it's now been looked over and talked about on Twitter and other places. So you can, I mean, the WikiLeaks material is available. I just thought maybe you might have some comment. I didn't know whether you had seen it or not, but I bring it up to you because I found it interesting.
Well, I saw stuff that was floating a couple of years ago, but well, before that, had been down. He lives, Edgar lived a short distance from my son. So when we were down there, I had visited him. I mean, as you know, we sat on the board at NIDS, and I've known him for decades. But yeah.
Okay, let's go a different direction. You've really done a lot of interesting work that appears to me, and written interesting books that kind of current people all think about UFOs. They don't know about it, and some of it's very interesting. So you wrote this book inspired by or befriended by, mentored by, worked with Jim Channon, and you wrote this book called...
Well, no, wait. I don't know where you're getting this stuff, but this is so discombobulated. Jimmy was a friend of mine.
Okay.
But First Earth Battalion and Delta had nothing to do with this. He was not particularly a UFO fan. I mean,
no. I'm not talking about UFOs. Yeah, I'm not even talking about UFOs. I'm talking about the content of the Warrior's Edge and your work with neuro-linguistic programming. Was Jimmy involved with that with you at all?
No.
Okay.
Now, Warrior's Edge is another decade back.
Yeah, I still find it very interesting.
If you got a copy, I'd suggest you keep it. I've heard some people go online with not worth what they're charging online for that one. NLP was totally different. I was working with Bandler and separately John Grinder and Tony Robbins on projects there, but that was with the Intel community and that we had Project Jedi and whatnot. That was totally separate from all of this other stuff. Yes. Although I was doing psychokinetic stuff. I already had my doctorate by that time and was interested in fact, became the president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies.
Yeah, this stuff is really interesting. So I don't think you've ever commented in any detail publicly about the warriors using non-lethally or even in a lethal fashion telekinetic abilities.
Well, you just jumped another decade.
Okay.
Because we didn't do any of the non-lethal stuff until after I had retired and gone to Los Alamos.
Yes, where you were project manager for the non-lethal weapons studies.
Right. But that's not related to any of the stuff we did either when I was at INSCOM or when I was the director of Advanced System Concepts for the Army Laboratory Command.
Okay, so tell me what.
Hey,
tell
Bob,
me then what.
Bob, I'm going to cut you off right there, Bob, because we do got to go to break here at the bottom of the hour here. Science Bob and Friends with special guest John Alexander. Yes, this is going to get real interesting. The heroic John Alexander, Science Bob, me. I'm just the Canadian guy trying to figure out all of this great science that we got going on tonight on Spaced Out Radio.
John, you've done so much stuff. It's hard to piece the different pieces together. I'm happy we're having this conversation. You're helping me and others.
Well, where do you want to go? I mean, this is kind of wandering around.
Yeah, we're trying. Well, what I was thinking about, we would work our way through several different topics. Some covered in your books, and then I mean, this is a long program, and we can go quite a ways.
Well, which book? They brought up Warrior's Edge. That's one. UFOs that I mentioned is a decade later.
Well,
2 decades later.
I don't think many people in this crowd know about, but many would be interested in both future war and winning the war, and your non-lethal weapons work and other things. I think that stuff is interesting.
Okay. Well,
you will definitely get to UFOs.
I'll follow.
All right. We are just in commercial break here, and we got about 4.5 minutes. Now, apparently, according to Greco in the chat room, he's betting everyone $100 that I have a pink ballerina dress on. That could not be further from the truth. Now, Science Bob, on the other hand, I have no idea.
I don't have my cape on tonight, so I'm failing.
Yeah, but you got the beard going on.
That's true. It's getting Santa Claus length.
I know. It's looking good.
I've been growing a beard in honor of COVID-19 quarantine that I've sworn, John, I'm not going to shave off until we have an effective vaccine.
It's going to grow for a while then.
That's exactly what I think. I think it'll be another 18 months before we have an effective vaccine.
All right, gentlemen, we got just over 2.5 minutes. Excuse me. All right, gentlemen, 2 minutes, just under 2 minutes, or just over 2 minutes. John, you're near Vegas, aren't you?
In Vegas, yep.
So what do you think about the city now becoming a pro sports city with the Golden Knights and now the Raiders?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm a little upset with the Golden Knights, but that's a long story. It has to do with the Army skydiving team. However, the owner actually is a West Point graduate who knew about that, and what he did was sent West Point and the Army Golden Knights a nice check, and all the controversy went away.
You know, my little tie to the Golden Knights, the hockey team, is their assistant coach, a kid by the name of Ryan Craig. Well, he's not a kid anymore. He's probably like 37, 38 years old. I actually used to train him when I was a hockey instructor before I went to broadcasting school.
Sorry, I don't know anything about them except kind of where they are. Got an interesting tour when they were developing the training center that they have.
Yeah, nice.
And, incredible amount of money was put in. Well, of course, they came close to winning the Stanley Cup first season, which is pretty remarkable.
Very true. Very true. Okay, gentlemen, we got about 15 seconds. Excuse me. Big thank you to Gorgeous Jules and Grendel for the super chats tonight. Thank you for everybody who's given us a thumbs up so far. Make sure you do that, or a thumbs down, and hit that subscribe button. Here we go. Second half hour of Spaced Out Radio is now underway. Dave Scott here in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. I want to remind you that if you miss portions of this show or others, check out our free archives by youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website, spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR News Wire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. We continue on with Science Bob and friends. Science Bob McGwier is here with our special guest tonight, Mr. John Alexander, and we are having a great discussion tonight. John, I want to ask you, if you don't mind, about your fascination with the UFO phenomena and what we see going on today. You are somebody who has investigated the UFOs. You've investigated the experiences with people, most recently with Chris Bledsoe. With what is going on in the public, especially the media and the governmental side, can we really separate UFOs or UAPs from any sort of ET contact?
Well, there's more to unpack there than you can imagine. One of the things I say is that, remember, there have been reports of contact between humans and sentient non-humans throughout the entirety of human history in all cultures, and that they happen to fly in little tin cans is actually a fairly new wrinkle. That's not to say there haven't been some UFO sightings, which there have dating back to millennia. But I begin with actually a more fundamental question, and that is, what do you mean by a UFO? And I ask that because I say, okay, I got little balls of light. I've got hard craft miles across, multiple witnesses, and thousands of variations in between. So what does that mean? When you say you're talking about UFOs, which ones, if any? And when you get to the question you raised about contact or whatever, given that we've had lots and lots of contacts going on and not flying in craft, what does that mean? If I were to believe the literature, you look at a whole range of different types and whatnot of what these critters might be. Again, from Nordics, Atlantic, little gray guys, big tall things, etc., etc. Now, are you telling me that Earth is on the galactic bucket list of places you got to come to visit? Because that just doesn't make sense. So we're looking at something that's far more complex. I might mention in my UFO book, the first line is UFOs are real. And I mean by that, there are some that are physical hard craft that, are observed and captured in all sensors. But the last paragraph goes something like, and whatever this is, it is more complex than we can possibly imagine.
What can we imagine?
I don't know. But whatever it is, this exceeds it.
Indeed. Okay, so kind of the first thing I heard about you being involved in that had to do with UFOs, which we haven't covered in any detail tonight, of course, is the Advanced Theoretical Physics Project. So you brought together people you knew and invited who had the proper security clearances to interact with people in government. How did this come about, and how did you lay it out?
Well, people used to ask what I do, so I'm a freelance colonel. Now, understand I had a day job and had regular duties and all of that. But I was a lieutenant colonel, had left INSCOM, and just found people and said, why don't we do it? And just said, it's going to be easier to get forgiveness and ask permission. So we started having meetings. Matter of fact, I had held several, had done some of this with my former boss, Major General Bert Stubblebine, had retired and was working at BDM, one of the local, Beltway bandits, and had skips, so we had a place where we could do it, hold the meetings, and just did it. I actually had held 3 meetings before I decided I'd better go confess. So I had a 3-star boss at the time. Well, I had a civilian in between, but 3-star immediate boss. So I went in and said, before you read this in the Washington Post, maybe you ought to hear what we've been doing. And his response was, oh, that's kind of interesting, but my boss, who's the 4-star, is down the end of the hall here. And I think we ought to tell him, too. So did that, and they all kind of nodded and said, that's kind of interesting, just, you keep powder dry and try to stay out of the press if you can. That was about it.
And how long did it go before it ended? Or did it end?
Well, so then 83, so I retired in 88. Actually held some other meetings after I went to Los Alamos as well, and some private stuff at my home in Santa Fe. So it was a number of years. Contrary to some of the rumors out there, I don't think that they shut me down. What happened is I got a job offer that I could refuse, and said the basic requirements were going to be a full colonel and breathe. And at the time I was running, like I say, the very, very advanced technology, had all of the tactical directed energy, all the stuff was coming in precision guided munitions and RISTA, reconnaissance, surveillance, target acquisition. I mean, lots and lots of high tech stuff. And to go out and do this other thing, I said, nah. So opted to retire instead of taking the thing. But I don't think there was anything forced about it. So you will see rumors to that effect on the net someplace, I think.
Yeah, I've seen that, but I didn't believe it. And the reason I didn't believe it is, well, let's just say you have a reputation for being a hardhead. And also, I feel you would have had a hard time turning down the really interesting work that you did after you retired. So since we've gotten there.
Well, now understand, I had no idea I did not have, when I retired, I did not have a job. I had been doing some interviews. I had done my cute stories. I actually had a very good offer from one of the big boys. That included actually an office in Roslyn, but you would have had to drive up 395. If anybody knows Washington, you know what a bear that can be. And anyway, what they offered, it had to go to the CEO to get signed off on. And so I was waiting, and then I got an offer from Los Alamos. Well, actually, it was an invitation offer. The invitation was to attend a friend's retirement. So, well, hell, this is a neat way to, get a chance to go to his retirement, and then pay for it. I had no intention of really getting a job there, but they made a counter offer, and frankly, the pay wasn't as much, but the bennies, because it was University of California, had all the federal holidays, and you start with your 30 days vacation as opposed to when you go to any of the contractors, you start, as if you're a new kid on the block. I said the perks are worth it, and I really don't look forward to driving up into Washington every day.
Yes, well, so I worked in and around the Beltway for the last several years of my life while I was with Virginia Tech, and it's worse now than it's ever been. So I'm happy not to have to do that. So I chose to live in Blacksburg rather than Arlington because I just did not want to deal with the Beltway every day, or I-66 either. So I get it completely, and it's worse now.
Well, 395, of course, was coming up from the south down towards Richmond. And
yep.
I ended up living just outside the Beltway in Springfield. But still, the traffic was just, doing that daily. And that was so bad that in the contract, they actually wrote in that they would give you a parking place. I mean, those things were fought over, and part of the things they actually negotiated.
Okay, so let's move into the kind of the other interesting thing that we need to cover so our audience knows about it. So sometime after you retired from the Army, you became program manager for non-lethal defense, and you were at Los Alamos. So first of all, how did this come about? And explain to our audience, please, what is entailed in the study and application of non-lethal warfare when you began it.
And how many weeks do we have to do this?
Well, exactly. It's a big topic, and my audience want to know some of it.
Yeah, well, obviously I had come out of the military and had combat experience and all of that, and had watched the invasion of Grenada. Panama had come along, and just outside looking at it, just saying, this idea of overwhelming firepower and things they still talk about, interesting, necessary, but there's an awful lot of other places where application of lethal force is counterproductive. And take areas like Panama, you have big families with long memories. And when you end up killing folks, you have a continued cycle of violence. And looking at that, we said war, everybody said war is about killing. I said, no, war is about imposition of will. How do you impose your will on an adversary to get them to do what you want them to do? And that doesn't necessarily mean terminating them. In fact, more recently, you've probably heard from the folks in Iraq saying, we can't kill our way out of this, which was true. So I was looking at what are the mechanisms by which we can apply force and do it, judiciously and without having the effects of even secondary or tertiary effects from lethal systems. Of course, the first invasion, Desert Storm, had come along. And we were frankly looking across a very broad spectrum from what we call the low end, with the anti-personnel kinds of things, most of the ones you know about, like tasers and beanbag bullets and pepper spray and those sorts of things. And then on the high end, I was contemplating what we call strategic incapacitation, i.e., how can I take down a nation state and be able to take control or reduce their access to their infrastructure, but do it in such a way that you can bring it back up. I.e., if I'm going to take out the electrical grid, hard bombs is one way, but your long lead items on recovery, or like you were mentioning before, 18 months, 2 years, things like that. Whereas what you really want to be able to do is deny access to the energy for a brief period of time, and then reconstitute it as quickly as possible, because you needed that, to support the civilian infrastructure upon recovery. So, yeah, it was that broad, and people really hadn't been, I don't even thinking in those kind of realms before. So I ended up holding, the first conferences on non-lethal defense. And of course, it started out with people saying, "What are you talking about?" And again, it was very, very broad, but we had did meet with the Council on Foreign Relations for a while, and that led to the development of something called the Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Directorate, where the Marines took over the responsibility for development.
That's great. So when did you leave that?
Well, again, when I left Los Alamos, I actually retired from Los Alamos. I retired a second time. Turns out we actually worked for the University of California, so technically I am a University of California retiree as well, and their system was very aid sensitive, so that worked out very well. And so I opted to actually retire from the laboratory, because it was clear to me that, remember, we were a nuclear weapons lab, and I was not getting the support internally that I was externally at the time.
Yes, exactly. So, but at least with the non-lethal weapon stuff, you had access. Were you able to use the supercomputer farms out there to simulate any of these things, or were they so separated because they were doing weapons simulation you couldn't access them?
Oh, yeah, but that's not what we did. I've got literally a picture, if you remember Cray. Actually, Cray 1 was in Los Alamos, and you got to see that. I've got a cute picture of me sitting in it. It's a little tiny round thing, but what they never showed you was the entire floor below that was power conditioning.
Yes.
And of course, we went to distributed applications as opposed to centralized computing.
Oh my goodness! Yes, the raised floors under a Cray 1 were covered a multitude of sins and wires and pipes. And I believe the only patent Cray had on the Cray 1 was for the cooling system. I thought it was hilarious.
Could be, but people just don't realize how huge that was.
Indeed. Okay. So, and in Los Alamos, during that time, you were really, really busy. Did you do any kind of UFO work at all?
Well, I held a couple of meetings and things, and I actually had met Ben Rich before that, and I was the one who sponsored him coming to Lanel. So we had talked about these things privately. I made a big leap here. I'm assuming people know Ben Rich was the president of Skunk Works, and interested in the topic. So,
okay, when did you become interested in remote viewing? The very first time you can remember.
Well, that's interesting, because in 1980, I was at Command and General Staff College. I was interested before that, but I wrote an article called The New Mental Battlefield, and it appeared in Military Review, which was the first time ever that remote viewing, psychic warfare, all of those things were ever discussed in a legitimate military journal. And that, too, turned out to be serendipitous, because what happened was I wrote the article. I was attending Command General Staff College, kind of not all that busy, and I had completed my dissertation and all that. So I wrote the article thinking, what the hell, there's probably no chance that this was ever going to get published. Turned out that the editor had a near-death experience in which he was out of his body and all of that. So you never could have figured that, but because of his personal experience, not only did it get published, but it became the cover article for the journal. And you may know that Jack, trying to think of his name, but there was one of the highly controversial reporters who would stir things up, Jack Anderson.
Jack Anderson.
Yeah, and so when the article first hit, by now I was actually in the Pentagon, and a couple of strange stories there, but it was kind of so what? And then Jack Anderson picked up on it and wrote an article that appeared in the Washington Post and other places called The Voodoo Warriors of the Pentagon. And that did stir things up. And he got most of it wrong, but that's okay.
Well, that was his shtick, was to stir things up and see how much trouble he could cause, especially if it sounded like the government was wasting money.
Well, no, that's actually a very key issue. And it was kind of a surprise because the article came out and it was highly negative, of course. It just exactly what you're saying. Look at how the government's wasting your money. Well, it turns out that the public wrote more. He said they received more letters to that article than to any article he had ever published. And it was running over 90, 99 against them. And that was kind of stunning. Ron McCrae, it turns out Jack didn't write that much. Ron McCrae was working for him, who actually had drafted the article. We met for dinner after that, and he showed me the original. And the original was a positive article, but they had made the editorial decision that it would be better to piss off the public about, abuse of public funds, and not prepared that the public thought it was a pretty good idea.
Indeed. So when
that
we
led
come back
to
from
Ron
break,
McCrae getting a book on. Ron McCrae, by the way, got a book contract from that and wrote a book on it.
when we come back from break, let's talk about some of the personalities and IRVA and this other stuff. Let's continue the remote viewing after we come back from break. Do you have anything short, Dave?
Well, besides my stature, no. But you know what? We are going to get into more remote viewing. We are going to get into more UFOs and see where it all goes, because we have the legendary John Alexander joining us tonight on Science Bob and Friends with our great scientist of Spaced Out Radio, Mr. Bob McGwier, Dr. Bob McGwier, I should say. He's got a fantastic beard going on, too. And Bob has committed that when he decides to shave the beard, we're going to put it up in the studio here. We got Spaced Out Radio continuing with hour number 2. Once again, Science Bob and Friends. We do it the second Wednesday of every month here. And we will continue this absolutely awesome conversation that we are having tonight live with John Alexander. We will be right back with hour 2 of Spaced Out Radio next. All right, gentlemen, we're clear.
I get it, John. It's just amazing. So I had a really weird career.
Bob, I'm stepping away for a couple of minutes here. I'll be right back.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I got my doctorate in mathematics, but I wound up being a field engineer doing intelligence work because I could MacGyver stuff to get it done. And it's just hilarious. No one could ever predict such a thing.
Yeah. Well, Los Alamos, that's when I told the party story. I went to Los Alamos to go to a party. I figured I'd have the government pay for it. Ended up staying.
Yeah, I worked at Sandia and Los Alamos, and I did it. And right after I got my bachelor's, and I figured out, because this was the 1970s, I figured out that if you really wanted to have an impact and get respect, you had to have a doctorate. So I left and went back to get it, and I got my PhD in applied math from Brown. And I got a little more respect from that after that. It was fun. It was fun living and working in New Mexico. I loved it.
Yeah, I actually lived in Santa Fe. Coming out of Washington, Los Alamos, the city was just too small. That's just, so.
Well, yeah, that long drive up from Santa Fe up the hill to Los Alamos can be. I bet it was a little rugged back then, wasn't it?
A little what?
A little rugged. It's still pretty winding.
I was just back a few months ago. Could not believe the changes that is now 4-lane highway, and you go in. Once you get into town, God, the traffic. You can go to town, but you go towards the lab. The place where you have to go in, there's 6 or 8 booths to go through and get badged. Now you can go through without it because these are technically public roads, but much more controlled than it was then.
Yeah,
a lot of construction going on up there.
I couldn't believe the 8 booths across the road with a guard in each of them checking badging and stuff. So it was pretty interesting going back. So I left there in 1977, took a couple of courses at Auburn University, and then went to graduate school at Brown. I needed time to get my act together and get my application in, but I really loved New Mexico. I would go up in the Jimenez Mountains near Bandelier National Park and et cetera, and camp. I'll camp a lot. I loved it.
Well, I worked at, for a while I was in the main complex in a TA-33, which is one of the remote sites just down from Bandelier.
Uh-huh. Neat. Yeah, I love that place.
Yeah. Well, I had visited because my Army job is Director of Advanced System Concepts, and in fact, when I was in the INSCOM as well, had started going there periodically on different kinds of things. So as I can say, because of what I was doing with all of the technologies, periodic meetings at National Labs was kind of a logical. And in fact, we ended up I was funding a project there from the Army on NEMR, non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, that took me out, so I was familiar with it. It's actually how I met the guy who was a Navy retiree that I went up for his retirement. I can say I was quite surprised when I ended up, particularly since I had the other job and had been sitting for like 3 or 4 weeks waiting for all I needed was the CEO to sign off on it. The day that the Los Alamos offer came in, I got the call from the other company saying, "Okay, you got it," and I'm going, "Well." You could hear the recruiter going, "Oh shit!"
1 minute, guys.
They asked,
1 minute.
They said, "Would you have come to work?" I said, "I've been there the next week, but I've been waiting so long, and then this other opportunity happened."
Yeah, you did the right thing.
Could never have planned that.
No, you just can't plan some of these things. How I wound up in Saudi Arabia after Iraq invaded is just the weirdest thing you can imagine.
You guys.
What were you doing in Saudi?
Go ahead.
Looking for tactical radios used by the Iraqis.
All right, guys, 30 seconds. You guys complaining about traffic in Washington, D.C., you have no idea what it's like to dodge the deer and the moose around here. Thank you. Thank you to Mere Person, Gorgeous Jules, and Grendel for the super chats tonight. Please do us a favor. If you like what you hear, hit that thumbs up or down. And more importantly, that subscribe button. It all helps us do what we do here on a nightly basis on Spaced Out Radio. Here we go in 4 seconds.
And the Iowa. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show.
Hour number 2 of Spaced Out Radio is underway tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott, sitting in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. We welcome you back to tonight's show, including if you're listening in on our terrestrial affiliates around North America and digitally on TalkStream Live and Revolution Radio. Remember, all of our archives are free. By going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio, do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. The Desert Clam has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Ventricumbent. Ventricumbent is your password. Use it wisely, Space Travelers, as the Clam sets a password each and every night right here on Spaced Out Radio. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. Tonight we continue on with Science Bob and Friends. Our resident scientist, Bob McGwier, comes on in once a month to discuss the more scientific approach to everything paranormal and supernatural. Tonight's special guest with us is Colonel John Alexander, and we are talking remote viewing right now. Bob, welcome back.
Happy to be here.
And Mr. Alexander, always a pleasure to have you on Spaced Out Radio as well.
Let's do it.
Remote viewing.
Let's keep going. So you started or were involved in the starting of the International Remote Viewing Association. How did you bring that about?
Well, how do we bring it about? Again, there's some history there.
Which we're interested in, John. We're interested in that history.
Yeah. Well, remember, I forget exactly when over it started, was it 95 or, because we just had a 20-year or 25 years. No, what happened was, the military had a program, and I was in INSCOM. I was not in what most people know as Stargate. Knew many of the people. Of course, our boss, Bert Stubblevine, was kind of a common factor and interested in unusual things. I kept track of many of the people after I retired, and a number of them visited Los Alamos. And trying to think of what the exact sequence was, but what happened from the program perspective, of course, in '95, they were trying to move the program from DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. The Army had moved it to DIA. DIA was trying to move it to CIA. Bob Gates was the director. I did not want that to happen. And this was now a period of zero-sum game as far as resources. Financing was available. And it was, well, if you're going to do remote viewing, what are you not going to do? There were some very powerful people who wanted on the Hill, who wanted funding to continue. The CIA did not want it back. So they did what you do with any program. When you want to go away, you study it to death. You say, okay, we'll do it, but you got to study it. So it did, and basically the response was not ready for prime time, meaning we're going to acknowledge this stuff happens, but to integrate it into an active intelligence program, they weren't prepared to do that. So you had some of the key people then start retiring out of the military. Joe McMoneagle, who had been 001, was already out on his own. But what happened in 95, they declassified the program. Before that, you couldn't talk about it. You will find, when I wrote The Warrior's Edge, I did do a chapter on it, but I was very, very careful to show that all of the information was from open source literature that was already available. So you then had the people going out and, creating their own schools and training protocols, some of which were changing. So I don't know, the idea came up like, okay, let's, we know the people. It was a fairly small club. And that's one of the things, particularly at that time, you were finding people popping out of the woodworks, like I was in the special remote viewing course. You go, no, everybody knew everybody and who they were. So we met Lynn Buchanan, was living in Alamogordo, and he was had been one of the detachment remote viewers, and offered to hold a section, and there was a conference was being held nearby on the Apache reservation, and we just got together, and word went out. There's a picture of, I think it's circulated, of all of the people who were there for the first session, and there was a guy who, David Hathcock, who remains pretty low key, who what he brought was enough money to get the program off the ground. So from that, Ervo was born.
That's interesting. So I think that meeting happened in Alamogordo, right?
Right.
Yes.
And then we was at Lynn's house.
Yes.
Yeah, we were at Lynn's house and then went up on the reservation.
I think that picture is not well known, or I believe I have seen it. And my recollection is that Kit Green and his wife, Al Putoff, Russell Tarr, all those people were there.
Kit was not involved. Hal and Russ were. Stephen Schwartz now does the Schwartz Report. He had entered from the civilian sector. Lynn Buchanan, Skip Atwater, who then bowed out, and of course Thompson Smith, who had worked she still does independence. She's here in Boulder City, in fact. But, that was mostly, and Marcello Truzzi was interesting because he had been a founder of PsyCops, the Committee for Investigation or Scientific Investigation of the Paranormal, which was, the opponents. But
yes.
Marcello was a true skeptic, and as opposed to, a denier. And so he was a good addition.
Dave?
John, for a lot of people who may not understand what the remote viewing program...
Wait.
Yes.
I am terribly remiss. Paul Smith was there. And he's kind of key because he became the president, and he several times, and he still does remote viewing training and became one of the better known people. Went on to get his doctorate from UT and what. So sorry.
Oh, no problem. For a lot of people in the civilian world who may not understand why the government was dabbling in remote viewing, we've often heard the rumors that it was about trying to maybe see what was going on over in Russia or other adversaries that was, classified maybe as enemies or even allies of the United States. Was that the reason why this program was set up, was to try and push the mind to its limits to see what it could see?
Well, there were several components. One of them was R&D, and then there was also an operational component. And so one of the things I say that, when you get into scientists, they argue about the theoretical viability, and you go, no, we had an operational capability. And it was designed, well, not only the Soviet, I mean, they were obviously one of the key target areas. Was also later used in drug enforcement and other types of things. Remember the Dozier case, when Brigadier General Dozier was kidnapped by the Red Brigade in Italy. I had a lot of folks working to see if they could find him. What's his name? In Beirut. There was named, believe me, a lieutenant colonel who had been captured and was eventually killed. But we're working against those targets. They also worked against people who were being held in Tehran, trying to figure out where they were and what the status was of all of the embassy people that had been kept. There's some interesting successes and some others not so successful.
Do you know if a program like that is still active today?
I'm sure it is not. And the reason I say that is that the talent pool is very small. Now, having said that, you see, Grill Fame and went through various iterations, ending as Stargate, was what we call a program of record. Meaning it was formalized, had a line, in the budget, most of the information was classified, etc. But it was formalized as to how the targets were derived, how the information was put in, how the information was derived, and then how it went back into the system, if you know the whole intelligence cycle. So it was formalized. Now, I do think, I'm pretty sure, because I talked to people who get calls, that there are individuals inside the government today who are still interested, but it's more like, if you pardon the expression, an old boy net or old girl net, where they find somebody who they've had success with, and then hit them up for specific things. But that is very different from a formalized program.
Bob?
Yes. So I noticed that you knew or met Monroe. Was that with Irma? Or
I knew Bob. Yeah, Bob was a good friend.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's what I thought. So did you know him before Irma?
Oh, well, no, he died. No, I'm trying to think of him. Yeah, absolutely. No, I met him in, 81, 82 time frame.
Wow, that was very early. So when did you meet Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ? Was it before remote viewing as in your other interests, or was it all during the remote viewing work?
Well, I don't know. I'm not positive because I had met Hal. I'm not sure what the exact sequence was, but the Society, British Psychical Society was having its centennial at Trinity College and in Cambridge, and it was also the 25th year of the American Society for Psychical Research, and I was there with a guy that I had been working with who had had a phenomenal NDE, and it was the reason we were working together. And I think that's the first formal time that we were together. In fact, there's an interesting photo, and Annie Jacobson used it in Phenomena, where there's a picture of us with the Chinese researchers. Hal's comment that we have the picture was taken, and Hal turned to me and said, "Well, I wonder whose intelligence briefing we'll be in tomorrow."
Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, Hal has had quite a broad range of interests and activities, but of course I guess he's personally most famous for the work he did with Targot at SRI. Were you involved at SRI at all?
Yeah, well, I had visited them there, and I don't know, I'd say Hal now is probably better known, well, in this circle maybe remote viewing, but in physics has to do with his work in zero-point energy, because he wrote the fundamental papers that showed up in phys rev letters. I think
Well,
the first time that was discussed.
My first introduction to Hal Puthoff was a really, really interesting book that he wrote. He wrote the first textbook in quantum electronics, which was really an important book in the early days. He's a brilliant physicist, and
Yeah,
I know he's
most
interested.
people don't. Yeah, a lot of people, particularly in these fields, don't recognize that that's the area he was doing a lot of work in. You know?
Yeah, I don't know why he hasn't won a Nobel Prize for that, because, I mean, our world is dominated by quantum mechanical effects in electronics, and it's about to really be a big deal. But we'll see how it goes over time. But he is a brilliant physicist. I'd love to see some kind of predictable an experiment which would give a falsifiable conclusion or falsifiable prediction about something to do with zero-point energy, just so we can get something concrete out of this. The weird effects of quantum mechanics at tiny levels, because of the weird things that happen probabilistically, and just it's just so interesting. And I don't know if ever we'll be able to capture it to do work, which of course is the big deal. Beyond theory, I'd like to see some practice.
Yep. Well, in fact, I'm trying to think which book. I think it was Reality Denied. I wrote to what he called his 1 watt challenge, because Hal did have a laboratory that was looking for, any new source of energy, had a lot of money potentially behind them, and we had what he called the 1 watt challenge, because you kept hearing all of these spectacular pronouncements about we're getting 200% above unity and all of this. And he going, no, if you can just give me anything, i.e. 1 watt above unity, that's enough to go on. And he became the gold standard for folks that were having these remarkable energy discoveries. And he said none of them ever panned out, but they were always hopeful.
Yes, so I don't know what to make out of the exotic vacuum objects or the zero-point energy, the Sapphire Project. I just can't quite wrap my head around people making these claims without showing me equations out of which I can make a prediction. But I sure would love for us to figure out a really interesting energy source. We'll just have to wait and see and hope it happens. Puthoff has really been working at it a long time.
Yeah, in fact, I used the concept in the book, Winning a War or something. And the point was that if you had such a capability, it changes the strategic dynamics of the world because you can make the Middle East irrelevant.
Exactly.
In other words, don't have to go there for oil, and changes everything.
Well, it looks to me like with fracking and solar and wind, we're close to hurting them badly as it is. But it's the death by 1,000 pricks rather than wholesale change, which might be better geopolitically.
Well, having said that, we also looked at what the numbers would be. They said, okay, suppose you had the breakthrough, and we did discover an ultimate source of energy like that. Still doesn't matter. At best, it's 2 to 3 decades that it would take you to integrate. So it becomes the primary source. And for those wonder what we're talking about, remember your cars and how many gas stations you have. So it's one thing to have it from a technical perspective. It's another to integrate it, throughout everything. If you put it in your car, a pound of unobtainium is just useless. If they can get 1,000 miles, it's got to go into something that turns the crankshaft, that turns the wheels, that moves the car. And a lot of systems that are required to integrate something like that.
Dave?
Yeah, John, as we start to transition here, because we only got about 2 minutes before we go to break at the bottom of the hour, and I want to start to kind of focus more in on the UFO aspect of your research and everything that you have done. Now, are you convinced, or do you believe that we have been visited by an extraterrestrial source on this planet?
I come down against the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and simply because it is too simple. It does not answer the complexities that we are faced with if you look at all of the interactions that have occurred.
So are you more leading towards an ultra-terrestrial?
Well, I don't know what you'd call it, but the point is that little gray guys in Zeta Reticuli are just too simple.
That is a very deep answer to that.
So you're and of course you've worked with on and off in this area with Jacques Vallée for quite a long time. He certainly has been promoting it can't just be flying saucers because it's too complex.
Right.
And how long have you known Jacques Vallée?
Ooh, again, decades. Jacques actually did the foreword to my UFO book.
Yes.
Or one of them. Had ended up with 3 accidentally, but was blessed to have too many as opposed to none, I guess.
Well, of course, you had Bert Brutan. How did that happen?
Well, I've known Bert for, again, a long time. That's a longer story than you have time for right now.
Yep, we got to
come back to
break.
it if you wish.
Absolutely.
Dave, take us to break.
Absolutely, and thank you, Science Bob, for coming with us on this ride tonight. Science Bob and Friends continues on Spaced Out Radio here with our special guest tonight, Mr. John Alexander. Of course, you can find John's books all over Amazon, anything online. You can find him. He is one talented writer with some of the deepest information you will ever hear as we start to focus in on the UFO discussion here on Spaced Out Radio. Science Bob and Friends with Bob McGwier and special guest John Alexander. We continue right after this. All right, gentlemen, we are clear.
All right, let's do some woo-woo UFOs.
I am so looking forward to this. So looking forward to this. John, you ever meet a little gray dude named Carl?
Named Carl?
Yeah.
That's his personal alien.
Yeah.
He needed a name, John.
I'm sorry?
When he showed up at my window, he needed a name, so I named him Carl.
Oh, yours. Okay. I was thinking of what it was. It was the movie, E.T. went out on a road trip and all that. Forget what his name was.
John, I want to ask you this, and we're not on the radio side, we're just on the YouTube side here. With your involvement with everything that you have done, has Hollywood portrayed the extraterrestrial phenomenon very, very accurately, from Close Encounters of the Third Kind straight up to what we see today?
Short answer, no. But they have a different problem. And that is, you've got to do, whatever they present has got to be in a graphics format and something that's comprehensible, to lots and lots of viewers, not the few folks who might understand things. So they go for the lowest common denominator, and mostly to scare the shit out of everybody.
Yep.
Excellent. Don't like the gray dudes, John?
This one?
You don't like the gray dudes? The little gray guys?
I'd come down against CT, but I kind of I'm in Whitley's book at the moment. What is it? A New World.
Oh, A New World.
Yeah.
And he's got some interesting hypotheses because he talks about spiritual beings, and even his wife who had transitioned have an interesting story on that, as being the same as or related to the visitors that he's had over a long period.
Well, we've got 2.5 minutes, gentlemen. Bob, you should have seen my little guy at hockey today.
Oh, I bet he's doing great.
He bumped up a level, and he got pushed to the limits today, which was awesome to watch.
There you go.
You had to keep up with the big boys today.
That's better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm in a little bit of a dilemma, though, because he's like, Dad, will you come on the ice and help coach? And I'm like, did you know Dad used to coach hockey? And he's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, Daddy used to coach hockey. Well, you have to come out on the ice with us now.
That's very cool.
I know you American guys can't comprehend the cold because it's like freezing level right here, right now.
Oh yeah, it was 81 here today.
Yeah, rub that in. I'm going to my Bigfoot gifting site in the morning.
All right, find the nickel.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we'll find the nickel. We do have we're gathering back the trail cam, and we'll soon see when we get there tomorrow if anything is moved.
That'll be very cool.
Yeah, you know Webb Hubble?
Yes.
Because he's done some interesting work down in the bayous there, and with ET coming in, and in fact, he gave a presentation that I introduced called "Why Did the Tree Cross the Road?"
Hold on, gentlemen. Here we go. We pass the halfway point of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott, sitting in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. We want to remind you that if you've missed portions of this show or others, check out our free archives by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website, spacedoutradio.com, has a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. We continue on with Science Bob and Friends tonight. Yes, retired scientist from Virginia Tech University, Bob McGwier, joins us. Our resident scientist also has a special guest with us tonight, legendary Army Colonel John Alexander. He's an author, researcher, has worked in remote viewing, and we're going to shift over to his research in UFOs now. Science Bob, welcome back.
So one of the most interesting things to me, John, in your UFO book was all the time you had a unique perspective on Philip Corso, because you knew about him through George Knapp long before he exploded into public view.
Right.
So just describe to us your interactions with Corso and the most shocking things you learned from him, or just tell us a bit about it, because that's, of course, Corso's still of great interest to everybody in the UFO field.
Yeah, it gets touchy, because I actually wrote a chapter UFO book called The Corso Conundrum, and in it I have addressed a number of things, and there's a letter when we had the manuscript. And actually, he had written another manuscript. This was more inclusive, but didn't have some of the things that came out in the book that Bill Burns had inserted. But anyway, I wrote him a letter, and it was 7 pages long, and it was, here are errors. And they were not long description. They were something like 1 or 2 pages, or 1 or 2 lines, rather. And it was simple stuff like it's Adelphi, Maryland, not Adelphia, to really complex things I have problems with when he said, no, the Cold War was not a cover for fighting ET. Thousands, that's correct, hundreds of other corrections. Now, turned out that he was in Fort Pierce, and my son, who, as I mentioned before, was in Palm Beach area, was about to get married. So I was down for the wedding, and Phil had had a heart attack, which most people knew about. So we went up the day before and spent a full day with Phil. And, what he said was, well, yeah, I need to write another book to correct the mistakes that are in there. And he showed me work that he had started on. Now, Phil was not computer literate, so a lot of his stuff was either literally typed or handwritten. But all there, and then what happened was a few days later, I think it was 10 days later, had a second heart attack, and that was fatal. And so all of whatever the corrections were going to be disappeared. So I have, like I say, the conundrum is he was who he said he was, but most of the other stuff does not hold together. And we had done extensive research. I had gone back to the Pentagon. Now, this is before the book came out, and we knew him. We were checking him out. There's a guy by the name of General Trudeau who was instrumental, who was legendary in the Army, very forward-thinking, and they were doing some various interesting things. What people didn't know about, something called Project Horizon, and talked to Edgar about this. And what you don't know is that, by and large, it was the Army that put us on the moon, because they had the ballistic missile program that was already going. And, of course, the key people, Werner von Braun and them, were actually brought over, and the missile program was there at Huntsville. Where do you go? I get into a lot of trouble with even some friends of mine, but basically I come down and say, it's not real. And I had a list. I went through, he has a list of technologies that supposedly were derived from the Roswell crash and that. My favorite example happens to be, the alien eyeballs and night vision device. Turns out that the guy who literally built night vision laboratory was a personal friend who was interested in, various kinds of phenomena. I had met him through General Stubblebine. And, by the way, the worst PK metal bending party I ever held was in his laboratory. But the bottom line was none of the, all of the things that were described about how night vision was developed is wrong. The money is wrong, the story, the shorts of, it's just not true. And we did similar things tracing the technology development from the others. It was up on integrated circuitry and some other things that he was saying lasers were developed from it. And you go back and you watch the literature, and it's just not true, because you go back and you can trace the origins and development of all of the technologies, and there are no leaps. What you would expect, if you believed his story, was that supposedly they went along a certain point, they would then insert this new thing and to give it a bump, and you do not see that in any of the technologies mentioned.
I know that's deeply disappointing to a lot of people that followed him, but I wanted to hear you say it in your own words, because that chapter in your book is really, really eye-opening, because a lot of people just gobble up everything Corso said as fact, and it's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, and by the way, love Phil. I said he was a good friend. He came. We tried to get him a movie deal. Corso got screwed royally by his agent, and I had known Steven Seagal pretty well, and Steven had contacted me and said he wanted to make a book out of the Corso, or make a movie out of the Corso book. So he was filming with Billy Crystal here in Las Vegas. We flew Phil out, and we had this conversation, and anyway, went around, he says, want to make the movie, do this, and his lawyer was there, and Seagal's lawyer, and so he disappeared for a while. We were having this other pleasant conversation, and the lawyer came back and said, there's no deal. I says, what do you mean there's no deal? Phil, doesn't own the rights to his own book. And it turns out that the agent had basically stolen everything, put it in his name. And it was so bad that when the book came out, major bestseller, they tried to send a cease and desist order to Simon & Schuster to get them to stop paying, just hold the money. And they say, we can't, because our deal is with the agent. And he lost big on that.
Oh, that's really terrible. All right, let's let Dave jump in for a second. Dave?
John, there's a lot of people out there who are now saying that video footage of any type of UFO is dead because of all the CGI, all the drones, everything that is really trying to take over the field, as people try to get their 15 minutes of clickbait fame and maybe make a small fortune on YouTube or other formats like that. In your opinion, with everything that is going on in the UFO world, can we trust any UFO or video evidence of UFOs anymore?
On its own, absolutely not. There's some old pictures that a lot of research has been done on before, as you said, the CGI kinds of things came along that certainly have validity, but there's nothing now that you could develop independently without having, supporting stuff. Now, remember that what you get, particularly with the Navy's systems and all that, is you have multi-sensory data where you've got multiple sensors, different, as well as human testimony as veridical, and you can do it from that. But somebody who pops up, and you do see it all the time, is I have this magic picture. No, you're not buying that, because people have gotten very, very good, and there's too many people with too much time on their hands, frankly, creating all of these scams.
Right. And it was also 3 years, 3 days ago, that the beginning of the To the Stars Academy actually came out in public. And I'm curious what your thoughts on the job they have done. You have a lot of friends on that field, and the last time you and I talked on this show, you did have some concerns about where they're going with the phenomena and their research as well. So 3 years later, what is your opinion of the job of the To the Stars Academy?
Good luck. I think they're well-meaning. There are area of difference, I think, is as to whether or not that constitutes a threat. Having said that, I know what Lou did, why he did, and when I was in my program, I did exactly the same thing. Because if you want money from the Department of Defense, there's got to be a threat. I mean, that's what they do. They do the threats. There's a lot of stuff going on. In fact, I was down in San Diego with them just a few months ago, and some other stuff that's moving. A lot of it's not actually related to UFOs, but I think they have potential, and I think they've been badly maligned by whatever the UFO community is. I mentioned the UFO community is their own worst enemy on these things. There's so much internal fighting that, but at least they've got some funding, and they've got some. If you saw James Fox's new film, Phenomenon, that's just out and available on the internet, and you'll see there some of the work that is sponsored by DeLong's group, and some very interesting stuff on construction of materials. It's not, you don't have unobtainium, but what you do have apparently are engineering techniques that are either at or beyond our current state of the art.
Do you buy the fact that there is a national threat to this phenomena, or do you think it's just political posturing?
No, I thought I just explained that. We haven't been invaded, been around for quite a while. I can understand concern, certainly, about interaction between both aircraft and certainly nuclear capability, etc. But that ET is going to come and invade, don't see that. But my take on whatever the phenomena is, in fact, in all the presentations that I give, I start out with things that have remote viewing, psychokinesis, firewalking, postmortem communication, near-death experiences, even cryptozoology, and the commentary goes, whatever it is, these things are all connected in some way. So I don't think that UFOs are going to have a simple prosaic answer. I've already mentioned I don't think it's little gray guys in Zeta Reticuli, meaning ET hypothesis is too simple and does not explain all the veridical observation. Now, we're going to get to Chris, but I know Bob said some of those too, and the integration of phenomena is just absolutely remarkable. And well, why would you do it that way? Like I said, I did when I was running the advanced theoretical physics program, did the same thing, because being in DOD, if you want money, you've got to have something to operate against. And there is no department of good ideas. No.
This may sound like a long shot, and you may reach through the phone and slap me across my face for this, but I would be remiss to ask, how close have you been to a UFO?
Pretty damn far. Closest, I don't know how high it was, what happened with Chris Bledsoe. Just a thing popped into view and went zipping off. So nothing like, like Jim Peniston or one of those from Bentwaters. Like they walked up and touched. In fact, first time I had called Jim that I want to talk about, says, "Oh, you mean the one I touched?" Nothing like that.
Damn it. And here I was hoping you were going to give me some goods on a story that you've never said in public before. 5 minutes.
I could do that, but I'd be lying.
Let's take one little more detour before we dive all the way into Chris stories in the next half hour. So one of the fathers of the hydrogen bomb has been in your home and talked to Hal Puthoff, and you intimated in your book that if anybody knows stuff being done by the government, it's probably Edward Teller. So what was your view of Edward Teller, and do you think he knew something that we about UFOs that the rest of us don't?
Well, Edward was a friend. And if you've seen those pictures, that was taken at my house in Buffet, and he was down for dinner. That happened more than once. Actually, it was the other time. Hal wasn't there, but we had him in specifically to talk about UFOs. And interested, but certainly not knowledgeable of any specific thing. But one of the things I thought of at least, was, look, if Roswell's real, and I come down against Roswell, and I know that's highly controversial, you can get friends who, close friends who disagree with that. By firsthand evidence, it does not hold up. And he said, if 5 people were in the loop, Dr. Teller was one of them, because he was at the time, and they were creating Livermore because he didn't get along too well with the folks at Los Alamos. But that was the most energy that was available on Earth, would have been nuclear fusion. And so if you're trying to figure out alternative energy sources, he would have been the natural guy. And we proposed the story, and he went through basically the identical thought process that we did, that if real, would scare the crap out of everybody, because the initial guess would have been, Soviets have made a big leap. And if that's true, that changes the dynamics of the world. And then the second would have been, okay, we have to figure out what it is. Can we take advantage of this, and how would you go about it? And frankly, rather than like Pat probably would have come to Lennell at the time, had it been real. And as I said, I will again say my position is highly controversial, and there are some people I totally respect who come to different conclusions.
Exactly. So I'm not going to ask you what it is, of course, but have you ever been inside a USAP?
Inside a what?
A unacknowledged special access program.
I think the problem with the question is the public has no idea what you're talking about. And if they listen to Stephen Greer and them, they certainly have a distorted view. When you say unacknowledged, it means unacknowledged to the public, not that you don't acknowledge it internally.
Exactly.
So it's been in a number of SAPs, yes. Were they known outside? Some were, some weren't. But yeah, I say the term is terribly misunderstood.
It is indeed. And it's amazing to me how many people still think that just because you have a security clearance, you know everything. It's just, it really seems to be a hard concept to teach people what need to know means and why it's there.
Yeah, but remember, that was the argument of Jesse Marcel Sr., because he was a major, and the S2 of our Army Air Corps was just converting to the Air Force at the time. And I heard him make the statements because I was the S2, I knew everything. I heard Corso tell me basically the same thing. I think it was even part of one of his books, because he had been the FOD or field officer of the day when certain things happened. He went, because you're FOD, you had access to everything. That is 100% not true.
Exactly. It's been a hard thing. People asking me questions. Dave, take us out of here with a question to break.
Oh, okay. I think I got one or two up the sleeve here. John, we have a lot of experiencers out there. You have been working closely with Chris Bledsoe recently. There are a number of people out there who claim to have some very large phenomena. We got about 45 seconds left. Why do we need to study the importance of people like Chris Bledsoe?
Why is it important?
Yes, sir.
Let me convert that to the problem that we have has to do with financing. And if you look at the Large Hadron Collider, with billions of dollars put into it to derive information of interest to a tiny subset of theoretical physicists, versus what about continuation of consciousness, which ought to be of interest to 100% of the population, and we don't fund that. The funding system is just totally incongruent with reality.
And we'll leave it right there, because that's a good place to end it before we go to break here at the top of the hour. Science Bob and friends, we have another half an hour with our resident scientist, Bob McGwier, and special guest tonight, Colonel John Alexander. Yes, we're going to get into the experiencer side, talk Chris Bledsoe, and a lot more. Then at the bottom of hour number 3, I will bring you the SOR Newswire and the Thought of the Dave. Jam-packed. Hour 3 next. All right, gentlemen, we're clear. Bob, I'm just going to step away for a minute.
Sure thing. I feel like, John, this doesn't matter how many times you explain the simple, what seems to you and me like the simple understanding and interpretation of what you're cleared to know, but then you have a need to know. It just seems really hard to get it across.
Yep. And, well, I told Richard Dolan, who comes up with many of these, I said, look, take a decade off, go into the system, and see understand what in the hell you're talking about, because the complexity of these systems just, these people just do not understand. And there's not unusual. I was an inspector general, and my boss was the inspector general, 3-star of the Army, and he had to create a school because we were coming in as already lieutenant colonels and colonels, and actually didn't know how the Army worked. And he was back at kind of square one, and he had a great talk that went literally from the foxhole to Capitol Hill and back to the foxhole again, as to how all the pieces went together.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I've been at the Hume Center, which was named after Ted Hume, who was DS&T at the agency for a while. Anyway, so he funded this center at Virginia Tech, and the purpose for it is to train scientists, mathematicians, computer scientists, and engineers, and expose them as much as possible to the kind of problems you work on in the IC and DOD. And it turned out to be really successful, but it was just nonstop trying to get people to understand how all of the intelligence community works, what all the different pieces were, why you needed classification, what the levels of classification are, why things need to be protected in a certain way, and why it makes it so expensive to give it that protection. It's just people gripe about $50,000 hammers, but they don't understand that hammer might have a classified application because of one little thing. It's pretty amazing, John. It just seems to be really hard to explain.
Yeah, well, when I was at my last job, laboratory command was only about 2% green, meaning 98% were civilians. And so people ask me what I do. I said, well, I'm a translator. I tell the scientists what the soldiers want. I tell the soldiers what the scientists can do.
Yeah, exactly. What is your doctorate in, John?
Well, behavioral science. I was working in thanatology, and But what happened, like I say, my formal training came up through various kinds of behavioral psychology and whatnot. Then an emphasis was in thanatology, death and dying. But because of the non-lethal stuff, there weren't many fields I didn't touch. Well, and both that and my job as a director of advanced system concepts, the breadth of technologies that you were exposed to there is just extreme.
Yes. Yeah, that's one of the things. So I've been involved in developing modern methods for doing communications and in spacecraft, trying to do things in a more modern way with the collapsing size, weight, and power of electronics. And doing spacecraft, there is no aspect of engineering and physics that you don't have to have some control of to build a spacecraft that's going to be successful. And I absolutely loved it. And I decided to retire so I could go back to writing programs rather than managing research of others. And so it's been fun to getting back to doing that.
Good. There's an advantage to being retired, choosing what you do and what you don't do.
Exactly.
Just over a minute, guys. Just over a minute.
I had just turned on. Bob Bigelow has created a new foundation to look at continuation of consciousness.
Really?
And I ended up turning him down because he wanted me to sit and write papers, and I said, no, I want to go out and do stuff.
We are going to cover consciousness for a bit. Let's bring that up. But right now, let's do UFOs.
Okay.
All right, guys. We got about 30 seconds left. And just so you know, John, when we get to the break at the bottom of the hour, when we say goodnight to you, just kind of hold on until we get into break, and then we'll give you an official goodnight from all of us.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen, 15 seconds. Thank you to Mere Person, Gorgeous Jules, and Grendel for the Super Chats tonight. Thank you to everybody who's given this show a thumbs up. We really appreciate that, and to all our new subscribers. Here we go with Hour 3.
Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Kicking off the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. Thank you so much for tuning us in. I am your host, Dave Scott. Really appreciate earning your listening ears for another night here on the mighty SOR. We welcome back everyone listening in on our terrestrial affiliates around North America, as well as digitally on TalkStream Live and Revolution Radio. Remember, all of our archives are free for you. We keep them at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. The Desert Clam has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. I knew I'd butcher this one. Ventricumbent. Ventricumbent is your password. Use it wisely, space travelers, as the Clam sets the password each and every night right here on Spaced Out Radio. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. For the final time tonight, we introduce Science Bob. Yes, Bob McGwier, our resident scientist here on Spaced Out Radio, and we are talking with special guest tonight, John Alexander. We're getting into experiencers, UFOs, and a lot more. We'll even try to dabble in some consciousness here. Science Bob, take it away.
Okay, so let's jump right in, John. Both of us have had an experience with Chris Bledsoe. So, of course, he after his initial contact experience, et cetera, in 2007, there was a lot of interaction in and around him, first with MUFON, and then he saw the lady, the light being, and there seemed to be all sorts of interest in Chris. So I know you went to visit him. I know you had an experience. First, tell me what piqued your curiosity enough to go and visit Chris, and then please tell us about your experience.
Well, I had met him at a friend's house and actually had interviewed him and had it on tape. And as you know, the initial story is very long and terribly complex, and certainly a number of different phenomena that were clearly of interest. So we had arranged to go and meet him and Yvonne and the family there at his the house where he was living, next to his mother's house. And well, what happened was we'd spent a couple of days in talking and decided to go down to the Cape Fear River where the original event had occurred. And by the time we got there, it was pretty late in the afternoon, muddy, nasty. Had to climb around or over a nasty fence and all that, and had left the car up in a field, and then you had to walk about a couple hundred meters down this, well, it was technically a road, but there was rutted and everything going down to the river. And so we went down there, and Chris explained where everything had happened that he had seen there, where the fire had been built, etc. So we walked back up, climbed back over the fence, and got to the car, and it's just now getting dark. And my wife Victoria and his daughter Emily were there. They got in the back seat and were talking, and Chris and I were leaning against the left front fender. He's pointing out where certain things had happened and all of that. And then all of a sudden said, "Oh, I think they're here." And within just a few seconds, this thing popped into view above us and went zipping off. That's why when you asked that, well, how close it was, I don't know. I mean, it wasn't like a close encounter. But the point here was the temporal relationship between when he said, "Oh, I think they're here," and the event occurring. There were some skeptics that said, well, maybe he knew the scheduling of when iridium flares would be dropped or something, and he looked back. And A, there wasn't any at that time, and B, memorizing such a complex schedule would be very, very difficult. And you know, we had no idea that I was going to be at that spot at that time. So
yeah,
anyway, that was the experience. Huh?
So, and a lot of people have visited him, and if they've had an experience, they go home, and sometimes some of it goes with them. Did you have a hitchhiker?
Right. No. Now,
okay.
Chris has been out here, and in fact, we went up on Mount Charleston, which is to the west of town here, a mountain that goes to 12,000 feet high. Had a tragic accident up there and whatnot, but there's a road that transits between a couple of the egress areas where you can come in up the mountain on either the east or west side, and then the crossroad. And we went on that. That's about the 9,000 foot level. And anyway, the thesis was that whatever it is likes to play with you and be playful. And so we had taken we had balloons and chem lights and stuff like that and setting off. So I am sure that there were some people in the area who may well have seen UFOs, but they were screwing around. But what was most interesting was the pictures where I have taken just seconds apart, all with flash, and some you see orbs in them, and seconds before that, none.
Yes, I've had that experience with Chris. So just a quick synopsis of mine before we delve into consciousness. I wrote to Chris and asked him, could I come visit? He took a while to respond because he was asking Jim Simivan if he knew me. And Jim told him, yeah, probably you should let me come visit. It couldn't harm, and it might even be interesting. So I went and visited with my wife, and it was raining cats and dogs for 3 days. So we just went over the history of all of his things for 3 days. And finally, the last night, it cleared off. We went out to observe, and we saw two of those things you're talking about. And Brian saw his first visual observation standing right next to me with the second of those things. And he ran inside to tell his mother that he had finally seen one. And so then I've started noticing these flash bulbs going off in the top of the trees, but they were always going off behind a limb, so what you could see was the light flashing off the limbs in the background. You couldn't see the direct flash. So, and that went on for quite a few minutes, it felt like. And then I said to myself, boy, do I wish they would move up so I could see them. And within seconds, that's exactly what they did. So they went off in the open sky for about 10 minutes because I made a point of looking at my watch. And then all of a sudden they stopped. And I said, well, Chris, do you think they're gone? And he said, no, they're still here. And so I began to notice this purple haze or aura forming in the sky. It looked like purple smoke in which there were waves, like the surface of a lake turned upside down in the sky and purple. And it wasn't very bright, but it was visible. And I told Chris about it, and I just kept looking, and all of a sudden, it just vanished. And within a second or two, Chris said, they're gone now, we can go in. So that part of the experience is similar. The part that's different is Sharon and I had a hitchhiker, and the hitchhiker did all sorts of things to make certain we were sure and aware that it was not just coincidence. This was constantly happening, and so that we were being prodded and poked and prodded and made aware that something was there. And both of us experienced miraculous healings that I won't go into because I want to go into other things.
Well, that's, I guess, the point. And one of the things that was most spectacular, if anyone who doesn't know, is that Chris had an incident just after the sighting down on the river, and he got home, got chased by a being, and long story short, he got captured, and he goes, whatever it was, had a telepathic conversation saying, you don't understand, we're here to help you. And the next day, he found out that he had been cured of Crohn's disease, which had debilitated him for 12 years. Now, I assume you saw the tree. Was this where the tree was still in the backyard?
Yes.
Yeah, the burning tree, because we're down there, a lot of healing occurs around, and one of the things I observed, I was following, my wife was walking down there, and had seen her literally fully possessed when we were in Brazil, but there are certain things that are noticeable when these things are happening with her, and that started, again, near the tree. And she and Chris were walking down there. And then, as you know, people were sending material in, clothing and things that they would put there and bless and send it back with the healing properties. Yes.
So I've introduced people to Chris who had dire illnesses, and as a result, their lives have been spared. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so John, let's move off of the UFOs for a moment because we only have like 12 minutes left. I want to understand what your current thinking is and research or has been in the realms of consciousness.
I think that's what we were just discussing, actually.
I agree.
Consciousness is definitely a component of all of these things, and it seems to be integrated. Now, one of the things I talk about, that's where you want to go, has to do with the continuation of consciousness, meaning beyond physical death. Yes. And I'm absolutely convinced such things occur. Exactly what that is a little hard to say, but that there is a continuation and that contact can be made. They mentioned Struber earlier. There was an example when Anne was alive and she had brain tumors. I had suggested that she go to Brazil to a guy who now in deep trouble in jail, but John of God. And one of the things we did is they knew I was going to Brazil. I was being invited down by the government and non-lethal area, but arranged to go to Abydinia for a couple of days to the Casa. We had been there before, but what Whitley did is they gave me a picture of Anne, and I took it to the Casa, and they had various places where you could go in and put these things in, pray over them, etc. And so after I did that, I sent him an email, said, okay, we did the deed. Now he said he knew where we were going. He did not know when I was going to be there. And the response was, well, she's had some of the better days. Now, obviously, didn't totally survive it, but she had some of the best days through that sort of interaction. And you can look at it temporally or spatially. He's in California, we're in Aberdeen, Brazil, unknown times, and yet had some kind of interaction that was positive.
Indeed, yes. So I've went off with friends to a supposedly haunted house in Virginia as a hoot on Thanksgiving, and we had some strange experiences that are, to me, unexplainable. I just my interest in doing actual research in the area of consciousness has increased dramatically, especially with the work that Daniel Hoffman out in California has done because of its mathematical components, where I believe it's possible that we could make predictions about the behavior of conscious agents, and they might be testable, which would be terrific. So the problem we have, as I see it now, and probably you're similar, is how do I detect consciousness? How do I measure it? How do I quantify things about it that would allow us to have a falsifiable hypothesis on which we can do experiments? So it's really, and of course, everyone wants to know, is there life after death? I've had enough experiences now to believe that consciousness is something like a field that is like other fields in physics all over the universe, and we just don't understand how we interact with it. It's just very strange.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that is happening, if you know Gary Schwartz down in University of Arizona in Tucson, and he's working on something called Soul Phone, where they're looking at trying to actually do a number of the things that you're suggesting, because where they can quantify information. Right now, you're at a very simple level, like, is it there? We'd mentioned that Dean Radin with ions has now moved up to Idaho, but was about to replicate the experiments that Gary had done. And of course, Gary had worked with the Dream Team before, and that's working with mediums, and have seen a number of mediums, and some of the work is truly spectacular. But as Gary used to point out, is that mediums weren't 100% accurate. And he used the Michael Jordan analysis and said, why did people think Michael Jordan was great? Because he never shot 1,000%. Best he ever got was around 45. But the reason they revered him, because it was better than everybody else. And that's what he was seeing with the mediums that he had, is no, they weren't perfect, but just better than everybody else.
Yes. So let's just take a slight detour with consciousness here for another topic. And again, I'm going to make it personal because I know you have a particular interest. So when I was younger than one, I died 3 times with cerebral meningitis, and the doctors resuscitated me. Told my mother I would be a vegetable, and apparently I'm not. I'm enough not a vegetable to get away with fooling people. So, but to me, those were near-death experiences, and I noticed in some of your writing that you had looked into NDEs in children. So give me your comments on some of the phenomenology or some of the things you've seen in NDEs with children.
Well, of course, Mel Morris is the guy who did the initial key work with the kids. But what you're pointing out is particularly interesting because you have the NDE when you're pre-verbal.
Yes.
Meaning you've got to wait until you learn language so you could even begin to try and describe. And the problem you have with most extensive NDEs is they're inapplicable to begin with, where even highly articulate people can't explain it. I happen to like Eben Alexander's approach. No relative, but his book, Proof of Heaven, is one that I really suggest people take a hard look at. But having had access, I don't know what you had, be interested in knowing what, if any, information you could derive at that time, even if you brought it forward. His was a complete knowingness of everything, but you don't get to bring it back.
So I can tell you a thing which was strange. So I'm one, and we move, and within 2 years, I come out of my room one day to where my mother and her friend are, and I start picking up records and telling them what I'm going to play, and they figure out that I'm reading at 3 years old, and I've never been taught to read. So I don't know whether any of that has anything to do with the NDEs, but it is, to me, an interesting correlated event because no one taught me to read. But I was reading I had a pretty good vocabulary for a 3-year-old, and I was reading. So it's just very strange. And then I have had lost time seeing UFOs, and then I forgot about it for 40 years. And then one day I recalled that my girlfriend at the time and I had a hour and a half of missing time when I was taking her home from the university back to our hometown. I believe I've had some strange experiences, John, and this consciousness stuff is of great interest to me because of it.
I guess probably the last thing I have to say is, like I said, the last paragraph of my book, and it applies not only to UFOs, but, the complexity that we're dealing with is beyond imagination. I think a question was asked earlier about research, and here we have something that's easily more complex than cancer, and we're trying to address it on minuscule resources, and yet ought to be of interest to 100% of the population.
Yeah, I don't quite understand it. I think in a puritanical country like the United States can be, you're messing with the purview of God or something like that. Is how a lot of people look at it, and I think it's a thing all of us ought to care about. Dave, do you have a question before we have to go?
Well, I wanted to ask during the break. Our radio listeners didn't hear it. Our YouTube did. About Robert Bigelow starting a new project that you were asked to be involved with.
Well, I will let them come forward when the time is right. Some know his wife died in February. And in fact, when we created NIDS, he did, his institution, there were two specific areas. UFOs was one, and continuation of consciousness was the other. So it's kind of picking up from where we were a few decades ago. But interested in the topic. The question, though, is not, is there? It is, what about it, and how do we interact? And I had even proposed that with NIDS, we've now had 6 folks who were on our science advisory board. That includes Edgar being one of them, who now transitioned and saying, can't some of you help us?
For sure. Gentlemen, before we say goodnight tonight, we should also, because we were talking about Chris Bledsoe, wish him a very happy birthday. And Science
Indeed.
Bob, thank you so much for another great show. John Alexander, thanks for joining us on Spaced Out Radio. Another pleasure to have the opportunity to chat with you. Coming up next, we have the SOR Newswire and the Thought of the Dave. Stay tuned. Spaced Out Radio continues after this. All right, gentlemen. Great show. Great show.
John, it was great. It was great talking to you. I really appreciate your doing it.
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
I'd be interested in hearing more about your NDEs.
So what I'm going to do, John, is call you. We know each other's telephone number. I'll call you, and we'll just talk about it at length.
Super. Very interesting.
And if you see Carl, John...
Tell you, I keep wondering if there's something going on with pineal gland during NDEs, or I really kind of want to grasp something that I can hold on to think about.
A lot of folks have thought about that one.
I'm sure they have.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a natural place for starting.
Well, with the production of DMT being part of what it does.
Yeah, but what we didn't hit in remote viewing, and one of the problems we had was it was one thing when you were remote viewing things as they were occurring or whatnot. It was another when you stood perturbation, and particularly when you see, future events.
Right.
All right, gentlemen, I got to get ready for the news here, so I got to call this off right now. But thank you so much, both of you, and Science Bob will talk soon. And Mr. Alexander, if Carl comes to visit you, please send him my way. He owes me a flight.
Okay.
Good night, John.
All right. Thank you.
Good night,
Bob.
Good night, everyone. Take care. And that's that. So, once again, I know there's a lot of people questioning what that echo was, and I just want to be able to say that was John's phone. He has, over the years of doing what he did, has troubles hearing, so he had the volume adjusted a little bit differently on his phone, and so that was the echoing noise you were hearing there. I apologize. We didn't get to any of your questions tonight. Normally we try to. It's a little bit different when we have kind of features like we do with Science Bob once a month. It makes it a little bit more difficult, so I do apologize about that, but we'll try and figure something out, and I'll try and get some of those answers for you. All right? All right, we got the news coming up here. After the show, for those of you who stick around, I'll give a little bit of an update on what I was talking about last night in the news about my son getting hit at school. So I'll give you guys a little bit of an update on that after the news. One minute. We've rounded third. We're heading for home tonight on Spaced Out Radio. I'm your host, Dave Scott, sitting in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us tonight. I want to remind you that if you've missed most of this show or others, check out our free archives at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. Speaking of the news, the news is always changing, which is why we bring you the SOR Newswire at the back end of every show, where we get to the weird, the strange, the wacky, and sometimes, another space war. Yes, since NASA retired the space shuttle program 9 years ago, the space agency has relied solely on Russian Soyuz rockets to fly American astronauts to the International Space Station. That long and once unlikely partnership ended after Russian spacecraft carrying a U.S. astronaut took to the sky for the final time. On Wednesday morning, a Soyuz MS-17 spacecraft with NASA astronaut Kathleen Rubins and 2 Russian cosmonauts on board blasted off atop a Soyuz 2-1A rocket from the Russian Space Agency's Baikonur Cosmodrome. Yes, it would be the last time NASA paid for such a mission. Starting next month, all future ISS flights involving American astronauts will be operated by SpaceX's Crew Dragon spaceflight, which completed its first final crewed test this past May. The Crew Dragon's first official mission will be to fly 3 NASA astronauts, Michael Hopkins, Victor Glover, and Shannon Walker, as well as Soichi Noguchi from the Japanese Space Agency to the ISS. The flight was originally scheduled for October, but it has now been postponed to mid-November due to engineering issues with the first stage engine gas generators on the Falcon 9 booster. NASA's dependence on Roscosmos rockets has been a controversial issue among American politicians for years. In 2014, the Federal Space Agency awarded 2 multi-billion-dollar contracts to Boeing and SpaceX, commissioning each of them to build a spaceship system that can transport American astronauts to the ISS. SpaceX completed the first job, and the space vehicle built by Boeing is expected to fly next year. As NASA switches to domestic launch partners, there's now talks about selling some of the SpaceX's as Boeing's future seats to Russia, like Roscosmos has to NASA. However, it's unclear whether that arrangement will materialize as a space Cold War brews under the surface of escalating geopolitical tensions. NASA is seeking Russian participation in other space collaborations as well. The most prominent of all is NASA's Artemis program, which involves ambitious plans to bring humans back to the moon by 2024 and build a permanent space station called Lunar Gateway in lunar orbit. NASA has invited all ISS partners to join the effort. Sticking with space, Blue Origin, the rocket venture founded by Jeff Bezos, launched its space tourism rocket from its West Texas test site to the edge of the Earth's atmosphere, marking the first test flight of the rocket in nearly a year. It marked the 13th test flight of New Shepard, as the vehicle is called, but it still has yet to fly with humans on board. Blue Origin was eventually supposed to send paying customers on brief joyrides to the edge of space, but the company has not started selling tickets, nor has it announced a price. So far, the vehicle has only carried science experiments and at one point, a test dummy nicknamed Mannequin Skywalker. During a webcast of the test flight, Blue Origin CEO Bob Smith said the only way that the company is very close it's very close right now to being ready to fly humans. New Shepard consists of 2 pieces, a small dome-shaped capsule with gaping rectangular windows, and a 60-foot-tall rocket booster that blasts the capsule up to 3 times the speed of sound as it hurtles towards outer space. The capsule is designed to detach from the rocket near the top of its flight path, climbing more than 60 miles and spending a few minutes suspended in weightlessness before parachuting back to Earth. New Shepard flew multiple experiments for NASA during its test launch, including a sensor mounted to the rocket booster's exterior that was designed to study how future spacecraft might conduct more precise landings on the lunar surface. The New Shepard booster was designed from the beginning to help Blue Origin develop lunar technology. Bezos has told a crowd during a presentation about Blue Origin's Blue Moon lunar lander program back in 2018. Blue Origin is also the design of a much larger rocket named New Glenn that the company hopes will deliver cargo and satellites into orbit, and a much more difficult and higher speed journey than just the shorter suborbital endeavors New Shepard currently undertakes. Here's the weird one. Remember last month when we were talking about that dude in a jetpack flying around LAX? Well, apparently, a person who appeared to be flying with a jetpack was reported near Los Angeles International Airport again, according to the FAA. It was the second time a person has now been reported flying with a jetpack near LAX since late August. A China Airlines crew reported seeing the person at an altitude of about 6,000 feet, 7 miles northwest of the airport at about 1:45 p.m. on Wednesday, according to the FAA. The identity of the rogue flyer, or flyers, if it even is really a person, remains a mystery. The FAA said it had alerted local law enforcement who were looking into the report. In the earlier incident, an American Airlines pilot called into air traffic control August 31st after the plane just passed a guy in a jetpack, according to radio communications. The pilot said the jetpack-clad person was only about 300 yards from the jet. A second pilot also reported seeing a person flying with a jetpack about 3,000 feet up and 10 miles from the airport that day. Only in L.A., one pilot said over the radio. The FBI is also investigating both incidents. Leah Coates, the first female jetpack pilot, has said that it's possible for a jetpack to go as high as 18,000 feet, but fuel limits the range. Jetpacks are also loud, so people near LAX would have heard it and taken pictures or videos. Coates suggests it could have been actually some sort of mannequin strapped onto a drone, but either way, flying in the path of jets is dangerous. Thank you for that high-quality reporting. Facebook has reversed its decision to prevent a seed company in Newfoundland from using a photo of a pile of onions, which the social media giant had deemed overtly sexual. Thank you, Facebook editors. Jackson McLean, the manager of Gay's Seed Company in St. John, said Facebook approved the online advertisement after he asked them for a review of the ban. McLean said he was setting up ads for the onion seeds when he got an error response back from the site. A couple of them came back with errors, and I looked into it further to see what the error was, and for the onion photo, it said it was overtly sexual. Yes, onions are now deemed sexual by Facebook. McLean said there was nothing sexual about the ad for the Walla Walla seed, sweet onion seeds. A photo on the packaging shows several whole onions piled in a wicker basket and a few sliced onions in the foreground. Oh, heaven forbid. Heaven forbid. Yes, there was something about the round shapes being next to each other that set off some triggers, he said. McLean thought it was funny and decided to post a couple of screenshots. I knew that our Facebook audience would get a kick out of it as well. He said the other error that popped up was for little Marvel peas. Yes, peas are now in trouble, which were flagged as promoting alcohol consumption. Because, yes, I always think of green peas when I think of booze. Yes, McLean said that while he actually hasn't heard anything back from Facebook, he figures the problem could lie with its algorithm. No kidding. They might have to do some tweaking there because there is nothing about peas that has anything to do with alcohol. I haven't heard from anyone at Facebook at all. We can only guess. Meg Sinclair, head of communications for Facebook Canada, blamed the company's filtering technology. We use automated technology to keep nudity off our apps, but sometimes it doesn't know a Walla Walla onion from a, well, you know. We restored the ad and are sorry for the business's trouble. Well, go for it, Facebook. But you know, all those ads will pop up the minute you start thinking about them or mention it to them. Yes. Isn't that weird? Try it. If you haven't tried it yet, try it. It's kind of eerie. A rare 1623 book that brought together William Shakespeare's plays for the first time sold for a record $9.97 million at an auction at Christie's in New York. The first folio contained 36 of Shakespeare's plays. One of only 6 known complete copies in private hands was bought by an American private collector, Stephen Lowenthal, founder of the 19th century rare book and photograph shop on the east coast of the U.S. The auction prices also marked a new world auction record for any printed work of literature. Excuse me. And smashed the previous high of $6.16 million for a Shakespeare first folio that was set in 2001. Comedies, Histories, Tragedies was compiled by friends of the English playwright 7 years after his death. It includes 18 plays that have never been published before and might have been lost, including Macbeth and Julius Caesar. It is an honor to purchase one of only a handful of complete copies of this epochal volume. It will ultimately serve as a centerpiece of a great collection of intellectual achievements of man, Lowenthal said. The first folio marked the first time that Shakespeare's plays had been organized as comedies, tragedies, and histories. The book's large size, previously reserved for law books and works of theology, helped raise Shakespeare's status in future years, Christie's book experts have said. Without the first folio, some of Shakespeare's most famous lines would have likely been lost, including classics like Friends, Romans, Countrymen, Lend Me Your Ears from Julius Caesar, and If the Music Be the Food of Love, Play On from The Twelfth Night. The sale was the first time in nearly 20 years that a complete copy of the first folio had come to auction. Amazing. We're still impacted, like 500 years later, by Shakespeare. Incredible. An Oregon State trooper responded to a stretch of interstate to help a man when 3 llamas escaped from the bed of his pickup truck. The Oregon State Police said that the man was hauling 3 llamas in the bed of his truck on Interstate 84 when one of the animals jumped out while the vehicle was traveling at a slow speed. The man noticed the llama missing after traveling about a mile down the road and returned for the mama llama. But when he stopped his pickup, the other 2 jumped out as well. Trooper Levi Macy arrived on the scene to help with the arrests, or to assist, pardon me. The owner ran back and gave me the rope to hook the mama llama's harness. Macy said Mama llama refused to get up, as you could see by her displeased facial expressions on the photographs. So I told him what would he say? I told him that I would llama sit while he wrangled up the others. Macy said the llama sat in the middle of the interstate exit ramp until being loaded back into the truck with 2 other animals. She was given some medication to ease her mama llama trauma. Yeah, the puns are getting bad in this one. The driver was issued a warning for operating with a leaking or shifting load. Llama wrangling may not be a required skill, Oregon State Police wrote, but here in Oregon it sure comes in handy. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? Well, let's move on. Trouble in Norway. Authorities say they have seized an electric scooter that has been adjusted to travel more than twice the legal limit for vehicles. Oslo police and the Norwegian Public Roads Administration, cracking down on this hardcore crime, said e-scooters were stopped and inspected by personnel conducting a joint operation in the city center. Officers inspected a scooter that appears unusually large and discovered it was capable of reaching speeds of a whopping 36 miles an hour, far exceeding the limit of 12.4 miles per hour that Norway imposes on electric scooters. Police said the scooter owner told the officers he was aware that the vehicle was illegal, but was using it as a means to speed his commute to and from work. The scooter was seized and destroyed, that evil scooter going 36 miles an hour. How dare he? How dare he? Can't believe Shirky Poo would bring in such vicious news like that. Customs officials in Florida got a weird one, but then again, it is Florida. Said they seized an unusual package that arrived via mail from Hungary when it was found to contain a complete horse skeleton. Yes, complete horse skeleton. Customs and Border Protection officials said specialists at the Jacksonville International Mail Facility discovered a package that arrived from Hungary containing more than 200 equine bones. Daniel Alfonso, the acting director of the field operations for the agency's Miami and Tampa field offices, tweeted photos of the bones arranged to create a complete horse skeleton. And, of course, that was followed up by the usual pun. Alonso tweeted, "No horsing around this one." Alonso said the package did not have a required veterinary services permit and would not be sent along to its intended destination. Stop horsing around, Florida Mail Company. Well, that's just bad. And finally, another useless world record was set. We should be oh so proud because a New Jersey pizza delivery driver has unofficially broke a Guinness World Record by folding 18 cardboard pizza boxes in 1 minute. Randy DiGregorio, he drives for Mezzaluna Pizza. I wonder if they have good pizza. Probably do. Said he realized he had the skill for box folding while competing with coworkers. Over time, when it's slow, there's no deliveries, DiGregorio says. You just kind of compete with other drivers and say, who can fold them the fastest? And over time, I started to realize that, hey, I'm pretty good at this. DiGregorio said he decided to take on the world record after discovering it currently stands at 14 boxes in 1 minute. The driver's attempt, which featured witnesses including Manalapan police officers, ended with 18 boxes folded in that time period. DiGregorio said he has submitted evidence of his accomplishments to Guinness and expects to hear within a few months whether he's an official record holder. My goodness. My goodness. So proud. So proud. I don't know where Shirk finds these damn things, but my goodness. Do we really need this in our news? Do we? Thought of the Dave happens every night at this time, where we ask a question on our Facebook and Twitter pages, then read your responses on the air because we love the audience participation around here. Today's Thought of the Dave is as follows. What's your thoughts on Tucker Carlson's continued coverage of the UAP phenomenon? For you, boy. This coverage comes at the end of this program, almost like it's a ratings grab. I feel his interest is sincere. My gripe is his program. Not even Tucker himself. It attracts all sorts of nastiness. John, when you look at the press as purely vehicles to get your message out, as many do, then you want the car that fits the most folks. You don't care where it was made or how fast it goes, or in this case, if the car can make right turns. Nathan, it's outstanding. Now he needs to break out of the frame of mind and go to the real experiencers, not just the top dog types. They only have a part of the story, and to the aliens, we're all like ants anyways, one as good as the other. Filth. It's nice to see at least one MSM, mainstream media, covering the subject. Too bad so many people hate on Tucker, otherwise it would probably get more coverage, and folks may take it a little bit more serious. Cherry, helpful, minus the group of people ready to pounce on you for saying anything other than Tucker is evil about him. I haven't met him, and as far as I know, nobody on Twitter has. Hard to make any value judgments. I heard something like 4 million people saw that segment, though. Jules, I don't like Tucker. He's infotainment, not news. But he's at least giving the topic a modicum of exposure. John, I'd prefer if disclosure took an extra year to happen. If it meant we could offload Carlson, he is a vile creature, and I don't want him anywhere near this subject and tainting it. Oh my, John. Quinoa, mixed feelings. It's good to get it into the normies, but Tucker is so polarizing that it feels like he's the wrong person to be in the mainstream talking about it. I'm a little surprised that he is too. Carl, I like it. Flap, wake me up when he discloses his position on other policies. Dominic, always thought he was you. As in me? No. I don't wear a bow tie that well. JP, Tucker Carlson is slightly less vile than Alex Jones. Truth. But he certainly doesn't add any credibility to the topic. Well, that's not nice. He's covering it. Anyways, Let's go with some more, shall we? Keith. He is doing it as a diversion from regular talking points. Ukrainian watermelon. It's called being an ethical journalist. The dig for the truth, real or not, lay out the facts. Jack. He's probably the most prominent media figure out there talking about this issue, so good for him. Davey. He is a tool. Yeah, he is a tool that is being used to spread the topic to the masses and make it acceptable. Brett. Perhaps he realizes that the UFO, paranormal, government, geopolitics, and social engineering are all connected to world events. Grant Cameron, our guest from Monday. I think he is much more into the conspiracy angle as opposed to what is really going on. Jimmy, he's drawing a lot of flack from within the UFO community due to his political bias and spin doctoring when it comes to the rest of his news coverage. I think some people feel he is not the type of MSM spokesperson the UFO subject needs, and to be honest, I agree. Kira, mixed feelings on it, but isn't any exposure of evidence better than none? We can at least wake some people up that this is happening in the sky above. David, his coverage of UFOs is one of his redeeming qualities. Barry, it's irrelevant. Who cares what the public is, or what a publicity-seeking journalist does and says regarding UFOs to promote his career? We'll leave it right there. Thank you to everybody on the Thought of the Dave. Thank you to Captain Shirk for the news and Science Bob, along with John Alexander, for a great show tonight. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Special thanks to everybody listening in at home, in your cars, at work, wherever you may be. Everybody in our chat rooms on Spreaker, YouTube, LGAB, Revolution Radio, Facebook, the Space Travelers Club at our website, and to all the snarkers and snarkettes on Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Thank you for listening tonight. Remember, this show is copyright by Spaced Out Radio and SOR Media Ventures Limited. Thank you so much for choosing to share your evening with us, because together, my friends, say it with me, we own the night. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Yes, the Woo Train has docked for the night. But tomorrow, my friends, we shall ride again. Your seats are always available. Your tickets never expire. And if you want to bring a friend, we got room for them too. Good night.